Hello, I'm Jennifer. I'm from Mexico, but I traveled through Latin America for a year, collecting folk tales from each of the countries I visited. And the story that I'm going to tell you today comes from Chile, from the Mapuche Indians in Chile. Many, many moons ago, in the land that we now call Chile, there was a small Indian village, a Mapuche Indian village. And in that village, there lived a girl named Shushu. Shushu was smart and beautiful. She had long, straight black hair, and she always wore a silver headband around her forehead. She was the daughter of the chief. She was the favorite child of the chief. And so the chief had chosen Shushu to take her into the forest, to take long walks in the forest. And there, he would try to teach her all the secrets that he had learned from his father and his father had learned from his grandfather. He wanted Shushu to learn to listen to the forest. Now, the chief had several wives, and one of those wives, the youngest one, Puyu, she felt so envious towards Shushu that the day that the chief announced her marriage, Shushu's marriage, to a young man in the village, Puyu, the wife, ran to see the witch to try to prevent it. And she told the witch what she needed. And Calcu, the witch, Calcu listened to her, and Calcu, the witch, knew exactly what to do. She went to the cemetery and she dug out the corpse of a young warrior who had been killed in a battle. And from each of his bones, Calcu, the witch, took a little splinter of a bone, of a little piece of the bone, and put them in a sack. And then Calcu took the bones and threw them all over the place. And the witch must have been very powerful because those bones ended up far, far away. And as soon as they touched the ground, they buried themselves. Back at her cave, Calcu, the witch, put the little chips of bone in a mortar, and she mixed them with snake poison, spider poison, and fat from the midnight bird. And then she started mixing. Kinyeantu lalu mongel kefin, kinyeantu lalu mongel kefin, kinyeantu lalu mongel kefin, kinyeantu lalu mongel kefin, kinyeantu lalu mongel kefin. She took the potion and gave it to Puyu and said, "Spread the girl with this potion the night before her wedding, and you'll see there will be no wedding." Puyu did exactly as she was told, and the night before the wedding, when everyone was asleep, Puyu quietly crept to the mat where Shushu lay asleep. She woke her up and told her that she had a cream, a magical potion that would make her skin glow and that would make her beautiful for her wedding day. And so Shushu, naive Shushu, let her spread that cream all over her body, her face, her hair. She even thanked her, and then Shushu went back to sleep, dreaming about her future husband. Well, on the next day, when Shushu woke up and she stretched her, she realized that her flesh was gone. Her face was gone. Her hair was gone. She had been turned into a skeleton. She was horrified. She grabbed her shawl, wrapped herself around it, and ran away from her father's house, ran away from the village, and just ran into the forest. And she stayed in the forest. And she cried and cried and cried until she could cry no more. But after all that crying, Well, she knew that something had to be done. She couldn't be a skeleton forever. So, when everyone in the village was asleep again, she walked back into the village, looking for the only person who could help her, the shaman, the Machi. The shaman was well known and respected by everyone because people said that he could foresee the future, that he could communicate with the ancestors, with the spirits of the ancestors, and that he could cure almost any sickness. Well, as Shushu approached the small hut where the shaman lived, the Machi, it seemed to her that he was even expecting her. He smiled knowingly, and she went in, sat on the ground, and told him everything. And the Machi listened to her patiently, with the patience that only wise people have. And after that, he took his drum and started beating his drum. And then he started spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning until suddenly he lay flat on the ground as if he were dead. But he wasn't dead. At that moment, his spirit was rising out of his body to travel into the world between worlds, into the sacred space where the spirits dwell, to try to understand what had happened to Shushu. When the spirit came back into the shaman's body, the Machi woke up, stretched, sat, and he told Shushu what had happened, who had done it, and what she had to do to recover her body. She had to find all of those bones. Do you remember those bones? The bones that the witch had thrown all over the place and they had buried themselves. Well, Shushu had to go, look for them, collect them, and bring them together. And when Shushu heard that, she said, but how am I going to do that? The forest is huge. They could be anywhere. Where do I start? The Machi just looked at her and said, I'm sorry, but that is a question that not even I can answer. Well, Shushu thanked the Machi, left the village, and went into the forest. And she knew that she was going to spend many days in the forest. And she wasn't really afraid of the forest because she knew it pretty well from those long walks with her father. But she did feel this sense of despair, of not knowing where to start. And so she walked and she wandered many, many days in the forest until one day, when she was lying on the grass looking up at the clouds, not really knowing what to do next, she heard a tiny voice. Tiniest little voice. And when she looked down, she saw that it was a small ant. An ant that was stuck to a piece of resin from a tree. And the poor ant was struggling and struggling and struggling. And so Shushu carefully freed the ant from the piece of resin. And then the ant looked all the way up to where Shushu was, and the ant said, you have to look here, 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 here. And so Shushu dug a hole, and she found bones. Lots of bones, little bones, fingers, toes, and she put them in her sack, and she kept on walking. And several days after that, when she was eating wild berries, she suddenly saw a deer. And she loved deer. It was one of her favorite animals. And so she just stayed still so as not to startle the deer. And that's when she saw that the deer was limping. The deer had an open wound. And Shushu knew a little bit about medicine plants. Her father had taught her. And so she approached the deer, healed the wound. And then the deer looked at Shushu with those big brown velvet eyes that deer have. And the deer said, look here for something, and then went away. And so she dug and she found bones. These were big bones, legs and arms, the hip, and she put him in the sack and kept on going. And very slowly, fall was turning into winter, and she was starting to get worried, because how was she going to survive by herself in the forest during winter? And one night, when she was huddled close to the fire, feeling very, very, very cold, she suddenly saw two gleaming eyes, two yellow eyes staring at her. And she knew that those were the eyes of a puma. And like all Mapuche girls and boys, she had always been taught to fear and respect the puma. But now, she had a puma right in front of her, a few feet away. So she closed her eyes and she tried pleading to the spirits of the forest, to the spirits of her ancestors, anyone who could help her. When she opened her eyes again, the puma was right next to her. And the puma was stretching out his paw. And the paw had a great big splinter in the middle. And so Shushu understood what she had to do. And very carefully, she took the splinter out. But when she did, she fell into a deep sleep. And during that deep sleep, she dreamed. She dreamed that a friendly dog was licking and licking and licking her face. And when she opened her eyes, she discovered that it was no dog. It was the puma who had stayed there, guarding her sleep, and now was pushing a pot with water so she could drink. Shushu drank all the water, and then she discovered that that was no pot, that was a skull. And the skull started quivering and shaking and moving towards the sack with the other bones, and then the other bones started coming out, shaking. And all the bones started getting together, forming a complete body. And then it was covered with this greenish fog. And when the fog disappeared, when the fog cleared out, the warrior had come back to life. And he stood up. And he wanted to thank Shushu. He understood what Shushu had done, but Shushu felt ashamed that she was a skeleton, and so she covered her face. And then she realized that she had recovered her body, her flesh, her skin, her hair, her eyes. So she stood up and smiled at the warrior. And then the warrior and Shushu started their long walk back to the village. And during that long walk, they talked. They talked about everything. But especially, the warrior told her all the things that he'd lived during the war. And she told him all the things that she had lived in the forest. And when he heard her, he thought, she has been as brave as I have during war, and I wish I had a wife like her. So when they arrived at the village, they looked for the chief. They told the chief what Puyu had done, and the chief immediately punished Puyu. And then he gave his blessing so Shushu could marry the warrior. And many years after that, the warrior became the next chief. And Shushu, well, Shushu became the first woman machi, the first woman shaman in the village. And she was well known and respected because she was wise and powerful, but especially because she had learned how to listen to the forest.